I want to thank David for reminding us that we are, in fact, part of a global migrant justice movement, where from South Korea to the Middle East to across Europe, migrant workers are organizing to demand justice, to fight against the horrors of capitalism. And I want to read to you a short quote from a statement that just has moved me so much over the past few weeks. It's a statement, a victory statement written by the migrant workers who were on hunger strike in Greece. And after 44 days of struggle, 44 days of starving themselves, they were able to gain a victory. They say, "The struggle is complete. With documents in hand and our heads up high, we return to our homes, our work vindicated after 44 days on hunger strike. The struggle unites us. With documents in hand and heads held high, we salute and wish farewell to everyone who supports us, to the people in solidarity in Greece and all other countries in the world, the doctors and their colleagues, all who stood by our side in these days of hunger strike." So these victories show us that even in a time of growing austerity, even in a time of extreme xenophobia and racist immigration policies, that victories are possible and that the people have the power to win. I want to say that we're gathered here today on Anishinaabe territory, and I want to honor the ancestors and the warriors who continue to defend this land, because they serve as a daily inspiration for all movements that fight for the freedom to move and all movements for social justice. I want us to honor the people of Grassy Narrows who have had the longest running blockade in Canadian history, fighting to protect their forests, their rivers, and the health of their people from mining and logging industry. I want us to honor our Indigenous sisters, mothers, grandmothers who fought against rape, assault, violence, and murder in the downtown east side of Vancouver and all across this land. I want us to honor the Algonquins of Barrier Lake who continue struggling to protect their traditional government against the imposition of third-party management. I want us to honor the people of Six Nations who continue to organize against housing developers encroaching on their territory. And honor the people of Tyendinaga who, in their struggle for clean drinking water and autonomy, demonstrated that even small communities such as theirs have the power to shut down railroads, to shut down highways, and to cause immense economic disruption to the tune of millions of dollars. I want us to honor the Athabasca Chippewan Nation that is fighting against the tar sands, one of the most environmentally destructive projects on the planet that's been forced onto their territory. Indigenous peoples and migrants across this land aren't fooled by the rhetoric here of multiculturalism, of diversity, of equality, these words that get tossed about by the Canadian state. We know that these terms are used by the political elite in this country to mask the daily forms of state violence that our communities are forced to endure. And though the Harper government may have apologized for kidnapping Indigenous children and putting them into residential schools, we know that today there are more children in state custody under the Children's Aid Society than there were in residential schools. And though Canada has apologized for imposing a racist Chinese head tax, today it still maintains a $550 fee for humanitarian and compassionate applications, a fee that poor and working class communities cannot afford to pay to get status here. And though Canada has apologized for the Chinese Exclusion Act, it continues its policies of exclusion against the Roma, against Mexicans, against Caribbean migrants in this country. And though they've apologized for Japanese internment camps, we continue to see hideous sums of money, our money, being taken out of our pockets to build a prison industrial complex. Prisons that we know are meant to house Indigenous communities, migrants, and communities of color. Accompanying these bankrupt apologies are outright lies that are told by dirty politicians, politicians like Jason Kenney, who dare come out and say things like, Canada accepts more refugees than any other Western country. Lies. Canada, the grim reality is that in 2010, Canada accepted only 11,000 refugees, while there are 45 million displaced people around the world. This number is less than Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Pakistan, Germany, and yes, even the United States. These apologies are meant to hide the reality of Canada's immigration system. In 2010, we saw that already dismal refugee acceptance rates, or already dismal quotas for refugee acceptance were cut by another 60%. In the meantime, we see that temporary foreign worker programs continue to expand in this country. As of 2008, more people entered the Canadian workforce with temporary status on temporary documents than with permanent residency. Recent regulations imposed on temporary foreign workers who are deemed low-skilled, and it's extremely racist when we think about the women of color, the men of color, and who it is that Canada characterizes as low-skilled. But those who are deemed low-skilled, they're allowed to build their lives in Canada. They're allowed to work here, but only for 4 years. And after that, they're banned from being in the country for 4 years and have to leave. Last Saturday, as the Tory government fell for contempt, it quietly released, as Luan mentioned, a new regulation that forces sponsored spouses to remain in relationships, to prove that they're in a relationship for a period of 2 years. Now, of course, we can imagine what this means for women who are in abusive relationships, who have to choose between status or staying in this relationship. And so as we hear about all of these changes, these regulatory changes that are being shoved down our throats, these are part of an attempt to create an immigration system that makes migrants permanently temporary. And so as we hear about the Tory so-called immigrant vote grab, paths to gaining permanent status continue to shrink rapidly. More and more people are forced to live and work without status and are forced to live with daily fear of detention and deportation. And this fear is encountered everywhere border policies are implemented. And we know that borders don't just exist at ports of entry in between countries. They exist in our cities, they exist in our neighborhoods. These borders are imposed by police, they're imposed by immigration officials, and are upheld at sites where essential services are provided. Every time an undocumented person, a migrant worker, goes and is denied access to education, to food, to healthcare, to shelter, to housing, to food banks, to justice, to dignity, these borders reappear. They appear in Parkdale, in Jane and Finch, in Scarborough, in Rexdale, where police routinely stop youth of color who are walking down the street, ask for their immigration papers. That's how Daniel Garcia, an 18-year-old friend of ours, a migrant justice organizer, had his immigration status uncovered. He made the mistake of going to an internet cafe to check his email when the cops stopped him and asked for his papers. And Daniel was, torn away, had to spend the holidays in jail, and was deported on New Year's Day to Mexico, torn even further away from his friends, family, and community. These borders reappear when going to access emergency services is not safe if you're a woman with no papers. These borders exist in hospitals where the cost of entrance to an emergency room is about $700. And that's even if it's a matter of life or death. What we see in this country is a system of apartheid. What we have here is an alphabet soup of, people being categorized as TFWs, LCPs, PRs, CRs, landed immigrant, permanent resident. And these categories serve to divide us. These categories serve to strip away humanity. This apartheid system seeks to instill fear and create social and economic segregation. Every year, hundreds of thousands of migrants enter Canada and are treated by this government as cheap, exploitable commodities, used and abused by Canadian companies, and then disposed of when no longer needed.